The steady hum of the jet engines filled the cabin, a familiar sound that signaled the beginning of yet another journey through the skies. Passengers moved down the narrow aisle of Summit Air Flight 327, carefully maneuvering past each other as they searched for their assigned seats. Some chatted quietly with their travel companions, while others scrolled absent-mindedly through their phones, lost in their own world. Overhead compartments were quickly filling up as people stuffed their carry-on bags above their seats, preparing to settle in for the long flight from New York to Los Angeles. Among the travelers was a man dressed in a simple navy hoodie, faded jeans, and a well-worn baseball cap. He slipped into seat 15B, a standard economy class seat, without drawing any attention. To anyone watching, he was just another passenger, an ordinary traveler blending effortlessly into the crowd. No one paid him a second glance, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Because this man wasn't just any passenger, he was Richard Lawson, the CEO of Summit Air itself. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. For years, Richard had dedicated his life to building Summit Air into one of the most reputable airlines in the industry. It prided itself on excellent customer service, unmatched comfort, and top-tier reliability. However, in recent months, troubling reports had surfaced, complaints from passengers who claimed they were being treated unfairly, ignored, or spoken to rudely by airline staff. Others had reported blatant favoritism toward wealthier travelers, while economy passengers were met with indifference or outright disrespect. Richard had heard enough excuses from his management team. He wasn't going to rely on reports, emails, or secondhand accounts any longer. If he was going to uncover the truth, he had to see it with his own eyes. So he came up with a plan, one that would expose what was really happening when he wasn't around. Dressed as an ordinary passenger, he would board one of his own flights in disguise, blending in with the crowd to experience the service firsthand. The moment he stepped onto the plane, he started paying attention. A flight attendant stood at the entrance, supposedly welcoming passengers. But when Richard passed by, there was no warm greeting, no polite welcome aboard. Instead, he received nothing more than a quick, disinterested nod before the flight attendant turned her attention to other passengers, specifically the ones who appeared wealthier, dressed in tailored suits and designer accessories. Richard wasn't easily offended, but this was his first red flag. He quietly took his seat, keeping a close eye on the crew as they moved through the cabin. He wanted to believe the negative reviews were just isolated incidents, that his airline still upheld the values he had worked so hard to instill. But as the flight continued, his optimism quickly faded. A blonde flight attendant, named Claire, walked down the aisle with a look of mild disinterest, as if she'd rather be anywhere else. When she reached Richard's row, she barely glanced at him before speaking in a monotone voice. "Sir, put your tray table up before takeoff." There was no warmth, no professionalism, just a flat, robotic tone. She didn't even bother making proper eye contact. Richard nodded and did as he was told, but he noticed the way she treated him, as if he was just an inconvenience rather than a valued customer. Then, just moments later, her entire demeanor shifted. As she approached the man in 15A, an older gentleman dressed in an expensive, perfectly tailored suit, her voice suddenly softened, turning sweet and polite. "Good afternoon, sir," she said with a warm smile. "Can I get you anything? An extra pillow? A drink before takeoff?" Richard's stomach twisted. He sat in silence, watching as the favoritism unfolded before him. It was painfully clear passengers were being treated differently based on their appearance. Those who looked wealthy received top-tier service, while the others were barely acknowledged. For the first hour of the flight, Richard continued his quiet observation. It wasn't just Claire. She wasn't the only one guilty of this behavior. A young male flight attendant, Brad, acted the same way. He was talkative, attentive, and full of charm when dealing with first-class passengers, but when it came to economy travelers, cold, dismissive. The difference was obvious, and the unspoken hierarchy of treatment was impossible to ignore. Richard was already disappointed, but things were about to get even worse. Halfway through the flight, he got up to stretch his legs and use the restroom. As he made his way to the back of the plane, He overheard hushed voices coming from the galley. He wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but the word stopped him in his tracks. "I swear, if this airline doesn't give me a raise soon, I'm out of here," Claire muttered, rolling her eyes. Richard Lawson is so out of touch. He sits in his fancy office making decisions, but he has no idea what it's like for us. Richard froze. His own employees were talking about him, without even realizing he was standing just a few feet away. Brad let out a quiet chuckle. "Yeah, well, at least we get some entertainment. Did you see the guy in 15B?
Total nobody."
I barely even acknowledged him. Claire snorted. "Oh yeah, I treated him like dirt on purpose. These low-class passengers don't deserve special treatment. If they want good service, they should pay for first class." Brad nodded in agreement. "Exactly. And the best part? These clueless passengers never complain. They just accept it." Richard's heart pounded in his chest. He had prepared himself to find issues, but this was outright arrogance and disrespect toward paying customers. He stood there for a moment, absorbing what he had just heard. But he didn't react, not yet. He wanted to see how they continued to behave for the rest of the flight. By the time the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Richard had seen enough. He waited until the last passenger had exited the aircraft before making his move. Claire and Brad stood near the exit, casually gathering their things when Richard approached them. Claire barely looked up. "Sir, you need to exit the plane now." That's when Richard calmly reached into his pocket and pulled out his executive badge.
He held it up for them to see.
Claire's face drained of all color. Brad's smug grin instantly vanished. Richard took a deep breath and spoke in a voice that was calm but firm. "I'm Richard Lawson," he said, "CEO of Summit Air. And I just had the worst flight experience of my life." Claire's mouth opened, but no words came out. She was frozen in absolute shock. Brad stammered, "Sir, we didn't know." Richard's sharp gaze silenced him immediately. "No, you didn't. And that's exactly the problem. You treat passengers differently based on how they look. You think you can disrespect people just because they don't appear wealthy enough? That is not how this airline operates." Claire's hands trembled. "Sir, please.
I need this job."
Richard shook his head. "You needed this job before you decided to humiliate paying customers. Now you'll have to find a new one." He turned to the flight captain and spoke with finality. "Effective immediately, both of them are terminated. I expect their employee badges on my desk by morning." The remaining flight attendants stood in stunned silence as their two colleagues realized that karma had struck. Instantly,